Welcome, sleepy souls, to the Creepy Night Show. Tonight, I'm here to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if there's a story you'd like to hear next, I would love to know that too. Have you ever walked through a cemetery at night and wondered if the dead really stayed buried? That question haunted William more than he cared to admit, especially since he was paid to spend his nights surrounded by graves. Hollow Creek Cemetery wasn't a place people visited much anymore. The town had grown away from it, leaving the grounds quiet, isolated, and wrapped in a permanent air of sorrow. For the locals, it was a relic of the past. For William, it was his workplace. He took the job out of necessity, not bravery. At 45, with a bad back and bills piling up, William had run out of options. Security work was steady, even if it meant being alone from dusk until dawn. Hollow Creek Cemetery stretched for acres, a rolling sea of crooked headstones, angel statues with broken wings, and mausoleums that whispered of forgotten wealth. At night, it was a different world. The trees cast skeletal shadows. The iron gates creaked in the wind, and the air carried a stillness that felt heavier than silence. Most nights were uneventful. He'd patrol with his flashlight, sip stale coffee in the guard shack, and fight off sleep until sunrise. But every so often he'd hear things, rustling where there shouldn't be rustling, or the low groan of shifting earth. He told himself it was just the wind, or animals, or his imagination trying to spook him. The dead don't dig themselves up. That's what he told himself. On a chilly autumn night with fog crawling low across the ground, William's routine broke. He was making his way down the gravel path that split the cemetery in two, swinging his flashlight left and right, when he noticed something odd about one of the graves near the back fence. From a distance, it looked unsettled. He frowned and walked closer. The earth was fresh. Dark soil had been turned up in a mound, damp and loose as if someone had just shoveled it. William checked the headstone, an old one, dated 1892. Whoever lay beneath had been there for over a century. There were no new burial records. He knew that because part of his job was to log them. So why did it look like someone had just been laid to rest? His radio crackled faintly, startling him. He pressed the button. "Control, this is Hollow Creek. I think I've got some disturbance on the north side. You got any records of maintenance here tonight?" Static answered him. Then silence. He clicked it again. Nothing. William crouched, running his hand over the soil. Cold. Wet. Recent. He leaned closer, and for just a moment he thought he heard something from beneath, like the faintest sigh of air pushing upward through the dirt. He stumbled back, heart pounding, his flashlight beam jittering wildly across the stones. "It's just settling earth," he muttered. Just settling earth. But when he forced himself to look again, he saw something else. The grave next to it, untouched the night before, also looked disturbed. And the one beyond that. 3 in a row, all appearing freshly dug, though he knew they hadn't been. He felt his chest tighten. His job didn't prepare him for this. He was supposed to watch for trespassers, vandals, maybe kids daring each other to sneak in, not graves that seemed to rewrite themselves overnight. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of whispering. At least that's what it sounded like. William whipped his head around, but the cemetery was empty. Nothing but rows and rows of stone markers staring back at him like silent witnesses. He felt suddenly exposed, as though every grave had eyes trained on him, waiting for his next move. Deciding he needed proof, William pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of the disturbed soil. But when he looked at the photo, his stomach dropped. The graves weren't there. The picture showed smooth, untouched grass and weathered stones. No sign of fresh dirt, no sign of anything wrong. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked back at the ground in front of him. The disturbed earth was still there, dark, undeniable, undeniable in the glow of his flashlight, but his phone swore otherwise. The whispers returned, louder this time, curling through the fog. William swallowed hard. "Hello?" He called out, his voice cracking. No answer. His gut told him to leave, to walk back to the guard shack, lock the door, and wait out the night. But his feet didn't listen. Instead, they carried him forward, closer to the line of disturbed graves as though some unseen force demanded he witness them. The third grave, the one farthest from the path, caught his attention. Its soil was not just freshly turned, it was sunken, as if something beneath had shifted, leaving a hollow space where the earth should be solid. William stared at it, dread pressing down on his chest like a weight. And then, as he watched, the ground trembled. Just slightly, but enough to send ripples through the loose soil. His flashlight slipped from his hand, clattering against a headstone. He dove to pick it up, fumbling, cursing under his breath. When he raised the beam again, the soil was still. Perfectly still. Maybe he imagined it. Maybe he was too tired, his eyes playing tricks. That had to be it. That had to be. The ground moved again. A definite shift, like something pushing from below. This time, William didn't breathe. He couldn't. He watched in paralyzed horror as the soil bulged upward, inch by inch, like a slow exhale from the grave itself. The whispers rose into a hiss, swirling around him in the fog. And then he saw it, just for a fraction of a second. Fingers. Pale, skeletal fingers, pressing through the dirt before sliding back down as if retreating. William stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. His chest heaved, cold sweat slicking his forehead. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't believe in the dead rising. But what he had just seen was no trick of the light. Something was down there. Something was trying to get out. His radio crackled to life behind him, sharp and sudden. A voice whispered through, warped and broken. "Don't let them dig yours." William sees skeletal fingers pushing through the soil, then hears a terrifying whisper over his radio. "Don't let them dig yours." The clock ticked past midnight, and the silence in Hollow Creek Cemetery deepened into something unnatural. It wasn't the usual stillness of sleeping suburbs or the peaceful quiet of countryside nights. This silence seemed to breathe, like it was alive, pressing down on Daniel with invisible weight. He walked slowly along the narrow gravel path, his flashlight beam cutting across crooked headstones that leaned like broken teeth jutting from the earth. The air smelled damp, heavy with moss and soil, as though the ground itself had been disturbed too recently. Daniel's boots crunched against the gravel, each step echoing in his ears like gunfire in the quiet. The graves he had seen earlier, the freshly dug ones, pulled at his thoughts like a magnet. No records, no calls, no scheduled burials. Yet the earth had been overturned, dirt piled high, and the faint outline of rectangular holes still etched into the ground. It didn't make sense. And then came the sound. At first it was soft, so faint he thought it might have been the wind. A scraping noise, rhythmic, deliberate, like metal against earth. He froze, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The sound came again, clearer this time, closer. A shovel. Someone was digging. Daniel's throat tightened. He spun toward the far corner of the cemetery where the sound originated. The beam of his flashlight shook across weathered stones until it landed on a patch of disturbed soil. But no one was there. No shovels, no workers, nothing. Just dirt that looked like it had been moved within the last few minutes. "Hello?" His voice cracked the silence, but no one answered. The sound had stopped the moment he spoke. Daniel swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. Maybe kids had broken in, or vandals. That had to be it. He gripped his radio. "Control, this is Hollow Creek. Do we have any workers scheduled on site tonight?" Static hissed back at him, the line fuzzy, broken. He tapped the radio, adjusted the dial. Nothing but static. He frowned. He had just spoken to dispatch an hour ago with no issue. Then, under the blanket of static, he heard something else. A whisper. Not words exactly, but a voice. Thin, dry, like leaves scraping across stone. It seeped through the static in quick bursts before cutting out completely, leaving Daniel staring at the radio in shock. The silence pressed in harder. He forced himself to move, flashlight beam steady now, cutting a path toward the disturbed soil. Each step felt heavier, like the earth didn't want him there, like the cemetery was pulling at his ankles. When he reached the grave, his breath caught. The ground had sunk in the middle, collapsed slightly, as if something had been pressing upward from below. His stomach twisted. He crouched, shining the light closer. That's when he saw it. A handprint, pressed into the dirt, not on top of the soil, under it. The dirt bulged up, the clear impression of fingers clawing against the thin layer of earth from below. Daniel staggered back, his chest tightening. His mind raced for an explanation. Maybe the soil shifted, creating patterns. Maybe kids played a prank. But the prints were too perfect, too human. Suddenly, a crow cawed overhead, its shrill cry shattering the suffocating silence. Daniel nearly dropped his flashlight, his heart slamming against his ribs. He looked up, watching as the black bird circled once before perching on a cracked angel statue nearby. Its glassy eyes glowed faintly in the beam of his flashlight. Watching. Daniel forced himself to breathe. He needed to leave, file a report, bring this to someone higher up. But as he turned to walk back toward the gate, movement caught the corner of his eye. A shadow, long and hunched, gliding across the rows of stones. His flashlight jerked to follow it, but there was nothing, just grave markers stretching into the dark. His skin prickled cold, and then came the whisper again. But this time, not from the radio. It drifted through the air, low and close, like someone leaning in just behind him. He froze, the hairs on his neck rising. Daniel. His name. Spoken in a rasping, hollow voice. He spun, flashlight sweeping wildly. Empty. Only headstones. Only silence. But the whisper still clung to his ears, chilling his spine. His feet moved without thinking, carrying him faster toward the gate. Gravel crunched louder now under his boots as his pace quickened. His breath fogged in the air, though the night wasn't cold. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. The gate was only 30 yards away when a new sound stopped him dead. A dull thud, then another, rhythmic, from behind him. He turned, his light finding the row of graves he had investigated, and his stomach lurched. The soil was moving. One of the fresh graves bulged upward, dirt cracking, shifting as though something was pushing against it from below. Another bulge appeared on a nearby grave, and another. The ground itself seemed to writhe. Daniel's flashlight shook violently in his grip, his breath caught, his body refusing to move. He could only watch in horror as fingers, gray, soil-stained fingers, broke through the surface of one of the graves. The hand clawed out, grasping the air, dirt crumbling around its wrist. Then another hand broke free, then another, from a different grave. The cemetery was no longer silent. It was alive with the sound of earth splitting, of fingernails raking soil, of muffled groans rising from beneath. Daniel stumbled backward, heart hammering so hard it felt like it might tear through his chest. The graves weren't empty. They weren't supposed to be dug. But something, someone, was in them. And now, they were coming out. He turned and sprinted toward the gate, gravel spraying under his boots. The whisper rose behind him, louder now, hundreds of voices layered together calling his name in unison. Daniel. He reached the iron gate, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the lock. His keys slipped, clattering against the bars. He cursed under his breath, grabbed them again, and jammed the right key into place. The voices grew louder. The scraping, the groaning, the tearing of earth. It was all right behind him. Finally, the lock gave. The gate creaked open, and Daniel shoved his way through, slamming it shut behind him. His chest heaved, his body shaking. But as he pressed against the gate, His flashlight beam still pointed toward the graves. And in that flickering light he saw them. Figures. Pale, dirt-covered, their eyes hollow sockets glinting in the dark. Standing just beyond the bars, watching him. One of them opened its mouth and whispered his name. Daniel staggered back from the gate, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his temples despite the cool night air. His flashlight beam trembled in his hand, dancing across the grotesque faces that stared back at him from inside the cemetery. They didn't move. They didn't lunge. They simply stood there in silence, dirt caked on their skin, hollow sockets fixed on him with unblinking hunger. The night around him felt wrong, like the air itself had thickened, pressing against his lungs. He fumbled for his radio again, clutching it so tightly his knuckles turned white. Control. This is Daniel at Hollow Creek. I need backup now. Repeat, I need backup at Hollow Creek Cemetery. Something's static. Nothing but static. Then, a voice. But it wasn't dispatch. It was the same whisper as before. Dry, cracked, like the voice of someone whose throat had been filled with dirt. Daniel. He dropped the radio, the device clattering against the pavement. His skin went cold as his name stretched and echoed inside his skull, as if the sound were burrowing into him. He wanted to believe he was imagining it. Sleep-deprived, stressed, losing it. But the sight of those figures, still watching him through the bars, made denial impossible. He turned, forcing his legs to move, and ran down the narrow road leading away from the cemetery. His boots slammed against the asphalt, each footfall echoing in the hollow night. The road stretched long and empty, lined by black trees that bent overhead like skeletal fingers. His car, a beat-up Ford parked at the maintenance shed, was still half a mile away, half a mile in the dark, half a mile with them behind him. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The figures were no longer at the gate. Daniel stumbled, nearly tripping over his own feet. His flashlight beam shook wildly, bouncing across the road. The gate was open now, swinging slowly on rusted hinges. They were gone, or worse, they were already following him. A sound broke the silence. A crunch, gravel shifting. Not behind him, not far away, right beside him. Daniel swung the flashlight to his left, the beam cutting into the tree line. For a moment, nothing. Only endless black trunks, their bark jagged and wet with moss. Then he saw it. A figure, standing between two trees, its head tilted unnaturally to one side, as though its neck had been broken and never set right. Dirt clung to its hollow cheeks. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, jerky motions, like it was relearning how to breathe. Daniel's stomach dropped. He spun the flashlight the other way. Another figure stood there too. Then another, further down the road. Pale, filthy shapes slipping silently out of the woods to line his path. They weren't chasing him. They didn't need to. They were hurting him. His heart pounded so hard it blurred his vision. He broke into a sprint, lungs burning as he tore down the road toward the maintenance shed. His flashlight beam jittered with every step, throwing wild shadows that made the figures seem closer, moving faster. He tried not to look, but his eyes betrayed him. In every gap between trees, pale faces flickered in and out of the beam, watching, waiting. He could see the shed now, its metal walls glinting faintly in the dark. His car sat parked beside it, the keys heavy in his pocket like salvation. He skidded to a stop, fumbling with the keys as he reached the car door. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped them. The sound of movement swelled around him. Branches snapping, dirt shifting, whispers curling through the air like smoke. He jammed the key into the lock, yanked the door open, and threw himself inside. His hands slapped against the steering wheel, his chest heaving as he fought to catch his breath. He shoved the key into the ignition, turned it. Nothing. The engine sputtered, then died. No, 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 come on. Daniel's voice cracked, panic clawing at his throat. He twisted the key again, the engine groaning before falling silent once more. That's when he saw them, through the windshield. Figures emerging from the tree line, one by one, stepping into the faint glow of his headlights. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, but their intent was clear. They were closing in. Daniel slammed his fists against the steering wheel. "Start, damn it!" He twisted the key one last time. The engine coughed, sputtered, and finally roared to life. Relief flooded his chest so fast it nearly made him dizzy. But before he could slam the gearshift into drive, a face pressed against the driver's side window. Gray skin stretched tight over bone, lips torn away to reveal teeth blackened by soil. Hollow eyes stared in, inches from his own. The figure's breath fogged the glass, leaving streaks across the window. Daniel screamed, shoving the car into drive. Tires screeched against the pavement as he tore away from the shed, gravel spraying behind him. The figure slammed a hand against the glass, leaving a streak of mud and something darker. But it didn't chase. None of them did. Instead, they watched as he drove away, their bodies motionless in the glow of his taillights, their heads turning slowly to follow him until the night swallowed them whole. Daniel didn't stop driving until the cemetery was miles behind him. His knuckles were bloodless on the steering wheel, his chest aching from shallow, ragged breaths. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see pale shapes sprinting down the road after him. But the night was empty, or so he thought. As he pulled into his driveway and killed the engine, silence fell heavy again. His house sat dark and quiet, the porch light flickering weakly against peeling paint. He sat there for a long moment, hands shaking, trying to convince himself he was safe. Then he looked at the passenger seat and froze. Resting there, half buried in soil, was a single object. A shovel, its blade caked in fresh dirt. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His mind scrambled, searching for an explanation, but none came. He hadn't put it there. He hadn't brought it from the shed, which meant only one thing. He hadn't escaped Hollow Creek Cemetery. It had followed him home. Daniel sat frozen in the driver's seat, eyes locked on the shovel lying across the passenger seat. The thing looked impossibly old, its wooden handle splintered, the blade dulled and stained not just with soil but something darker, something that gleamed faintly in the dim light of the dashboard. His chest tightened as though invisible hands were squeezing his ribs. He hadn't touched that shovel, hadn't brought it into his car. It had appeared, and if it had followed him from Hollow Creek, then that meant whatever he had seen in the cemetery wasn't trapped there. It could come and go as it pleased. A soft thud shook the car. Daniel flinched, whipping his head toward the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just the faint glow of his porch light reflecting off the wet asphalt. His breath hitched. Another thud, heavier this time, reverberated against the roof of the car. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, holding himself still, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Then came the slow scrape, like fingernails dragging against metal. It crept across the roof of the car, moving toward the driver's side. Daniel couldn't take it anymore. He slammed the door open and stumbled out into the night, his legs shaking as he spun around, flashlight raised. The roof was empty. No hands, no figures. Nothing but the sound of the wind rattling dead leaves against the gutters of his house. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. He forced himself to grab the shovel from the passenger seat, holding it like a weapon. The wood felt damp in his hand, sticky, as if it had been resting underground for years. He tried to shake the thought away, locking his car behind him, and hurried toward the house. Inside, the air felt heavy. The familiar walls of his living room, his couch, the crooked lamp, the muted glow of the clock, offered no comfort. It felt as though the cemetery had seeped in with him, staining the air. He dropped the shovel on the kitchen table with a hollow clunk. His phone sat charging on the counter. He grabbed it, his hands trembling, and dialed dispatch. The line clicked, rang once, twice. A voice answered, but it wasn't dispatch. "Daniel." The voice was wet, gurgling, like dirt packed in the throat. He dropped the phone, heart pounding as the whisper bled from the speaker until it cut off with a shriek of static. The screen went black. Dead battery. Daniel staggered back, pressing his fists against his temples. This isn't real. It's stress. It's lack of sleep. That's all it is. His voice cracked in the empty kitchen. But then came the sound that made his blood freeze. The creak of his back door opening. Daniel whipped around. The kitchen door, which had been locked, now hung ajar, swaying gently. Beyond it, the yard was nothing but blackness, a pit of shadows. He lunged for the door and slammed it shut, sliding the deadbolt into place. His pulse hammered in his ears. He turned back to the kitchen table, and the shovel was gone. The table was bare, the wood dusted only with a faint smear of soil. Daniel's stomach dropped. His throat went dry. He backed slowly toward the hallway, eyes sweeping the room, every shadow a threat. Then, he heard it. Digging. The steady rhythmic sound of metal biting into earth. It wasn't outside. It wasn't in the yard. It was beneath him. The sound of shovels cutting through soil echoed up through the floorboards, a dozen hands clawing at the foundation of his home. Each strike rattled the air, deliberate and patient. Daniel stumbled backward, his heel catching on the rug. He fell hard, the breath knocked out of him. The digging continued, steady, unhurried, as though the dead had all the time in the world to reach him. The floor beneath his hands felt wrong, too soft, as if the wood itself was giving way. He scrambled to his feet and ran upstairs, heart pounding so hard it hurt. His bedroom door slammed behind him, though he didn't remember pushing it. He pressed his back against it, chest heaving. But the digging followed. Louder now. Beneath the house. Beneath him. He pressed his ear to the floor. His blood ran cold. He could hear them. Not just the shovels. Not just the clawing. Whispers. Dozens of them. Layered. Overlapping. Calling his name. Over and over. The sound of hollow voices rising through the foundation of his home. Daniel. 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 The wood beneath his ear pulsed like something was pressing against it from below, testing its strength. He staggered back, grabbing the lamp from his nightstand and clutching it like a weapon. The whispers grew louder, pressing at the edges of his skull until he could no longer tell if they were in the floor or inside his head. Then, suddenly, silence. Daniel stood frozen, chest heaving, lamp trembling in his grip. The silence pressed in again, thick and suffocating. He almost wished for the whispers to return, anything but this unbearable quiet. Then, with a slow, groaning creak, the floorboards in the center of his room began to bulge upward. Wood splintered. Nails popped free one by one. The floor groaned as though something massive pressed against it from below. Soil began to sift through the cracks, spilling across the carpet in small, dark clumps. Daniel's scream caught in his throat as the first pale, dirt-caked hand burst through the floorboards, fingers twitching and curling toward him. He stumbled backward, crashing into the wall, his lamp falling from his grip and shattering against the floor. In the darkness, more hands broke through, clawing their way into his room. The graveyard wasn't in Hollow Creek anymore. It was inside his house. Daniel's heart nearly stopped as the first skeletal hand ripped through the floorboards. Its skin was gray, taut, mottled with rot, the nails jagged like broken glass. Dirt spilled into his bedroom with every twitch of its fingers. The sound of wood splintering grew louder as another hand broke through beside it. Then another, then another. Within seconds, his bedroom floor was alive with grasping, writhing hands. They clawed at the boards, tearing them apart piece by piece, widening the gaps until soil poured through in clumps, spreading across the carpet like a wound bleeding open. Daniel pressed himself against the wall, his chest heaving, eyes wide as terror rooted him in place. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to run, but his legs felt like lead. The whispers returned, swelling from beneath the house, echoing through the gaping cracks in the floor. Daniel. 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 His name, layered in a chorus of hollow voices. The first head pushed through the floor, bursting upward with a shower of dirt. Its face was skeletal, lips peeled back to reveal blackened teeth. Empty sockets stared straight at him, the faint glow of something unnatural burning deep inside them. Its jaw unhinged, creaking open wider than it should, releasing a sound that wasn't a moan or a growl, but something between, a gurgling rasp like wet soil being sucked through a throat. Daniel's stomach twisted violently. He lunged for the door, yanking it open so hard it slammed against the wall. He stumbled into the hallway, tripping over his own feet, and crashed against the banister. His flashlight, miraculously still in his pocket, clattered to the floor. He snatched it up with trembling hands and beamed it down the hall. The digging sound was everywhere now, echoing from the walls, the ceiling, the very foundation of his house. The dead weren't just under his bedroom anymore. They were under everything. He bolted down the stairs, his boots pounding against the steps. But halfway down, he froze. The front door was wide open. Daniel knew he had locked it. He remembered sliding the bolt himself. Yet now it hung ajar, swinging gently on its hinges, letting the cold night air spill inside. And silhouetted in the doorway was a figure. Tall, thin, head cocked unnaturally to one side. It just stood there, half in shadow, half in the glow of the porch light. Watching. Daniel's throat went dry. He raised the flashlight, the beam trembling, and shone it on the figure. It was one of them, gray, dirt-stained, hollow-eyed. Its face was slack, its mouth hanging open, but the moment the light hit it, the corners of its lips twitched. It smiled. Daniel screamed and tore down the stairs, vaulting past the figure at the doorway. He shoved it with every ounce of strength he had, the thing staggering back onto the porch as he sprinted into the night. His feet slapped against the pavement of his driveway, his lungs burning as he ran without thinking, without direction. But the night wasn't empty. Shadows shifted between the trees at the edges of his yard. Figures stepped out one by one, pale shapes emerging from the darkness. Dozens of them. Maybe more. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, but their eyes never left him. They were surrounding him. Daniel spun in a circle, panic flooding every vein. His only thought was escape. His car sat parked by the house, but the memory of that face pressing against the window slammed into his mind. No. He couldn't risk it. He needed distance. He bolted toward the woods, flashlight beam cutting wildly through the trees. Branches slapped against his arms, the ground uneven beneath his boots. Behind him, he heard the shuffle of feet, the snapping of twigs, the low hiss of whispers chasing him into the dark. Daniel. Daniel. The sound swelled, rising in unison, layered voices weaving into a grotesque chant. His breath tore raggedly from his lungs as he ran deeper and deeper, the trees closing in around him like a cage. Then, he tripped. His boot caught on something solid, and he went sprawling face first into the dirt. The flashlight flew from his hand, clattering against a rock, the beam spinning wildly before landing on the ground in front of him. Daniel pushed himself up, coughing, wiping soil from his face. He reached for the flashlight, but froze. The beam illuminated something directly in front of him. A headstone. Old. Weathered. Cracked straight down the middle. Moss grew thick across its surface, but the name carved into the stone was still legible. Daniel Harlow. His blood ran cold. His breath hitched as his eyes traced the dates beneath his name. Born, 1986. Died, 2023, the current year. His chest tightened, his throat closing. His mind screamed that it wasn't real, that it was a hallucination. But when he touched the stone with trembling fingers, the cold grit of the carving burned against his skin. No. His voice cracked, shaking. No, I'm not dead. I'm not. The soil at the base of the headstone shifted. Slowly, deliberately, a hand broke through. Daniel staggered back as another hand erupted from the dirt, then another. Soon a body was clawing its way upward, dragging itself out of the grave. And the face that rose from the soil was his own. His hollow-eyed reflection, skin pale and rotted, jaw sagging as it crawled out of the earth with jerky, unnatural movements. It stood, mirroring him perfectly. The same clothes, the same face, only ruined. And when it spoke, its voice was his voice, layered with the rasp of soil. "Daniel, come home." The ground beneath him trembled. More hands burst through the soil around him, clawing at his boots, pulling at his legs. He screamed, thrashing, kicking at the grasping fingers. His flashlight beam swung wildly across the graves, rows and rows of headstones, every single one carved with his name. Dozens, hundreds, every grave, his grave. The earth split wider, swallowing his feet, pulling him downward. He clawed at the ground, his fingernails tearing against the dirt. The whispering voices rose into a deafening roar, all chanting his name, pulling him into the soil. And as the earth closed over his chest, as his doppelganger leaned closer with that grotesque grin, Daniel realized the horrifying truth. They weren't just after him. They wanted him with them. They wanted to bury him alive. The world felt as though it had collapsed into a narrow tunnel, and Paul's breath echoed inside it like a dying wind. He stood frozen among the crooked headstones, the earth beneath his boots trembling as though something deep underground was stirring. The shovel he carried slipped from his fingers and fell with a dull, final thud against the damp grass. His eyes fixed on the graves before him, the ones that had been freshly dug without his knowledge. But now they were no longer empty. Every grave that had once gaped open and raw now stood filled. The dirt was packed, smooth, and freshly turned, as though the burials had already been completed. Yet there had been no funerals, no mourners, no service. Only Paul, alone, watching the impossible unfold. His mouth went dry, and he whispered, barely able to form the words, "Who's in there?" The silence that followed was unbearable, thick and suffocating. Then came the sound, faint at first, almost too soft to recognize. A scratching, a desperate clawing from beneath the soil. Paul staggered back, his heart hammering, his throat tightening until he could barely breathe. He wanted to run, but his legs betrayed him, locking him in place as the sound grew louder, more violent, as though countless fingernails were raking furiously against the coffin lids below. And then, through the trembling earth, came the muffled cries. Voices, hundreds of them, overlapping, desperate and broken. Some screamed for help, some begged for release, others moaned incoherently, like those trapped in nightmares they couldn't wake from. Paul fell to his knees, his hands pressed against his ears, but the sound was inside him now, vibrating through his bones, gnawing at his sanity. The names carved into the tombstones blurred before his eyes, and he realized with mounting horror that some of them were not names he had ever seen before. They weren't of the town's dead. They were new, too new. And then his stomach dropped when he saw it. One headstone standing at the end of the row, freshly carved with chilling precision. His name, Paul Mercer. The date of death etched into the stone was tonight. His breath came in ragged gasps as the ground beneath that headstone trembled more violently than the others. Dirt shifted, lifting and falling as though something, or someone, was forcing its way out. Paul scrambled backward, his boots slipping in the wet grass, but the soil continued to rise, splitting open like a wound, until a pale hand burst through the surface. The hand was followed by another, and then, slowly, painfully, a figure pulled itself out of the grave. It was him. Paul stared in disbelief at the figure clawing free. A perfect reflection of himself, down to the security uniform, the dirt-stained boots, and the terrified expression. Its eyes, however, were wrong. They were black voids, endless pits that swallowed what little light remained in the cemetery. The doppelganger's lips curled into a slow, grotesque smile. "Shifts over, Paul," it rasped, its voice a hollow echo of his own. Paul stumbled backward, tripping over a cracked stone, his chest heaving as if it might burst. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his throat. Around him, more graves split open, and more hands clawed their way to the surface. Dozens of figures emerged, some mangled, some rotting, some disturbingly intact. And among them, scattered like mirrors, were more versions of himself. Each wore the same uniform. Each bore the same face. Paul's mind fractured at the sight. He spun toward the cemetery gates, desperate to escape, but the iron bars loomed impossibly far, the distance stretching unnaturally, as though the graveyard itself was reshaping, trapping him inside. His breath fogged the air, and the shadows lengthened around him. The other Pauls began to move, their heads tilting unnaturally in unison, their void-like eyes locking onto him. They stepped forward as one, boots crunching against the earth, voices overlapping into a horrifying chorus. You don't belong among the living, not anymore. Paul's chest seized with terror as he turned and ran, his lungs burning, his vision tunneling. The cemetery stretched endlessly in every direction now, tombstones repeating like a broken reflection, the paths winding in circles. He could hear them following, the shuffle of countless feet, the moans of the restless dead, and the steady, mocking footsteps of his double. Finally, he stumbled into a clearing, the original spot where he had seen the first open grave. Only now, there was no row of headstones, no familiar landmarks, just a single open pit, deep and black, yawning before him like a mouth waiting to devour. At its edge lay his dropped flashlight, still glowing weakly. Behind him, the footsteps grew louder. He didn't need to look to know they were closing in. Paul's heart thundered as he stood at the pit's edge, his body trembling, torn between fight and flight. But there was no escape. The graveyard had become something else, something alive, something hungry, and it wanted him. A cold hand touched his shoulder. He spun, and his double's face was inches from his own. Its grin widened, impossibly stretching across its face. Time to go home, Paul. Before he could resist, the figure shoved him backward. He fell. The grave swallowed him whole, the earth closing over his body as the world went black. When the sun rose over Hollow Creek Cemetery the next morning, the grounds were eerily still. The graves stood undisturbed, the grass heavy with dew. And in the caretaker's logbook inside the office, the night shift was marked with neat handwriting. Paul Mercer, signed out 6 a.m. But Paul Mercer was never seen again, and late at night, if you walk past Hollow Creek Cemetery, you might hear it. The shuffle of footsteps, the faint cry of voices beneath the soil, and the sound of a man's voice whispering through the gates. Shift's not over yet.